after. So thanks again for everyone joining us here. Just a couple of overall comments, and then we'll get into things. Uh, First of all, I appreciate that everyone's muted. Good Zoom manners. And if you want to keep your cameras off, that's fine. If you don't, that's also fine. We just want to try and avoid distractions like this that will keep going for a while because it's that time of day. Um, I am very pleased and grateful for this opportunity. That was an inspiration of a few other alumni. I'm not sure who if anyone is here who instigated me to kind of organize this. But based on some briefings and media interviews that I've been doing this week, especially, someone said, "Well, why don't you do it for Emory alumni?" And initially, I kind of that was stupid because we're alumni of a great university, but we're not a very we're not a distinct group. We're all quite diverse, and so it didn't make sense to me. And then it did make sense, and I'm on that level. I'm really glad to be able to be doing this. I don't think I know many of you, so just by way of introduction and background, who I am and why on earth, other than the fact that I happen to have gone to Emory and graduated in 1987, why on earth are you listening to Jonathan Feldstein sitting in the Judean Mountains tonight? After graduating Emory, I went into nonprofit. I've been in nonprofit since then, so I guess that's about 35 years. If the noise is distracting you, it's distracting to me. Someone just let me know, but I don't mind the distraction. I think it's apropos tonight. So I've been in nonprofit for a lot of years. I worked for a number of Jewish and Israel advocacy organizations. The first of which allowed me to stay in Atlanta for a few more years, working as the information officer at the Israeli consulate at the time, which I will speak about shortly. Today, I'm the president of the Genesis 123 Foundation, and our objective is to build bridges between Christians and Jews and Christians with Israel in ways that are new and unique and meaningful. We're sponsoring this program, but this is not meant to be a commercial for the Genesis 123 Foundation. However, should you be awake at night and burning desire to want to know, the Genesis 123 Foundation is genesis123.co. I'm married 29 years. I have 6 children. My oldest daughter is married. She has 2 children who are all sleeping in my house right now because of the situation. And we have been living in Israel since 2004. So we're coming on our beginning our 18th year here in Israel. Many ways it feels like it was yesterday. In many ways it feels like it is like we've been here for eons or forever. I do want to thank those who helped nudge me to do this this evening. I want to thank Rabbi Fleschel from Maor at Emory, who also was excited about this, understood the significance, and shared it with students and parents, and for everybody, local people present and those who are not present, for reaching out this week. It's been overwhelming in a good way, but it's really overwhelming to try to have to answer everyone thoughtfully how we're doing. So actually, there's an article coming, and I posted one today on my Facebook, which is similar. And I'm not yet sure how we're doing. It's a very complicated and stressful time. So I hope that I will. What my intent today is to give you a bit of a background in I don't know 15, 20 minutes. Give you some personal reflections, and all along take questions. Very informal right now. If you want to send a message in the chat, please use that. If you have a question, I'm not above being interrupted. It's fine. I may forget where I was, so you need to remind me. Literally, why am I sitting here right now? And I think the catalyst for now, this is the second or third briefing I've done, and a couple of media interviews this week. And this week's only Wednesday. Monday, we're closest friends from the US were here celebrating their daughter's wedding. And because we're talking about family, literally like family. I know you all have people like that yourselves. And fortunately, my oldest son, who's 22, was able to get out of the army to come to the wedding. He walked in, and the wedding was close to our house. He walked into the house, in his whole uniform on Monday at around 5 p.m. He looked tired, didn't seem like anything was going on, although we knew things were going on. Remember, that Monday, we'll talk about this later, was also Jerusalem Day. Things were very tense here on Yom Yerushalayim on Monday, and everything seemed fine. We went to the wedding. We began having a good time. Pre-ceremony, we knew that Hamas was threatening rockets, and my 15-year-old has been very obsessive about this, was following when the threats were coming, and like a Swiss clock, boy, those guys, they will fire their rockets. So just after 6 p.m., like you're hearing now, the red alert sign went off, and where we were facing in the southern Judean mountains, if you've been here, if you know Israel, we were looking out toward Beit Shemesh, and we could see it. We could hear the explosion. We didn't see the rockets because they were landing in open spaces, so there were no Iron Dome countermeasures, but we heard the landing and we saw the plume of smoke. 3 or 4 places. We heard the boom, 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 and all in more or less the same area, a little south and west of Jerusalem. During the ceremony, my son snuck over to me and said, "Abba, I need the car key." My two youngest daughters we're going to drive him back to his base. He's being called back. He has to be there at 9:30 that night. So he made it to the ceremony. He was out. We agreed that the girls, even though it was a little bit stressful, anyone driving into an area that rockets are flying already, having one daughter, much less two, driving down in that area was quite stressful. And on the way, they picked up my son-in-law, which is why my daughter and the 2 kids are sleeping here now, because my son-in-law, who's 30, almost 31, is in a pretty serious reserve unit, and he was among the first 5,000 reservists called up. This is how we've been living the last couple of days, and then on Tuesday we heard from my son, no, nothing happened, and he's annoyed that they didn't go down to the border because nothing's really happened, and he could have stayed at the wedding. That was his attitude. Later in the day, we heard from him, oh, we're going down to the border. They're taking away our phones, so I'll be in touch. I don't know how, I'm not looking at the demographics of everyone who's here. Most people are age enough to be parents. That's a really stressful thing to say your son's going down to the Gaza border and he's not going to have a phone to be in touch. I understand why, but it's terribly stressful. Last night, we went out to dinner with our good friends who just celebrated their daughter's wedding here. And my 15-year-old, who's got ADHD and who gets stressed out about a lot of things, didn't want to go to my daughter's house. He wanted to stay home alone. And we're like, okay, then you'll stay home, it's fine. But, and honestly, we never thought that there would be rockets near here. They're not coming this direction. We had that in 2014. We had a rocket land on the hill, on the valley across from our home. Andrea, who's on the call, I don't know if you were here then, I don't remember, Andrea, but
I moved just after.
Just after, so you missed it. It was a wild experience. If anyone wants, I can go into that. But literally, it landed 200, maybe 300 yards away from our front door, and it was shocking. My son then was traumatized, and we figured, how on earth is he going to stay home alone if there was an issue? I will tell you, and it's so interesting and kind of brings in the whole gamut of the stress and the emotions that's going on this week. We're out at dinner and he's texting pictures to us, to the whole family, that he took outside my bedroom window, watching rockets launching from Gaza. Now we're 40, 50, someone want to check me? I live in Efrat in the Judean mountains, we're at least 40 to 50 kilometers as the crow flies from Sderot, which is just before the Gaza border. I don't know how many kilometers it was that he was seeing the pictures, but he had the sense to go there, and he looked out our bedroom window because we're on the top floor, and he's such a smart kid. He took the binoculars and held his phone up to the binoculars and took a picture through the binoculars. It was not a good quality picture, but shocking how well you could see this stuff going on. That's just kind of the setting as to where we are. I'd like to share 3 stories and then kind of get into some of the details. And again, I welcome questions. It was the end of March 1988 that I was asked to attend. I don't know why. I was asked to attend an Emory Alumni event in Atlanta. I was there still, called Emory in the World. And I remember it vividly for 2 reasons. Jimmy Carter was the speaker, and it was the week of the signing of the anniversary of the signing of the Camp David peace agreement with Egypt. And Jimmy Carter had just come back from one of his international tours in the Middle East. I don't have a lot of fondness for Jimmy Carter, to be full disclosure. He went on to a whole big thing about Emory in the World, including his ranting about Israel and how Israel's to blame for this and Israel's to blame for that. And he had just been in Syria and Jordan. And in every place he went, he was complaining about Israel. And there was time at the end for one question. And I think I broke the speed of light getting my hand up, and I got the question. And I thanked him. And you all know Jimmy Carter's smile. I thanked him. I said, President Carter, this week, however many years ago, my father let me stay home from school in order to watch the signing of the peace treaty. And I never will forget that. Thank you for your part. And he got that big peanut smile that you can all remember for those of you who remember his campaign, or at least the caricatures that came afterward. And then I said, and I was so proud of myself, I said, but from an academic perspective, when you go represent Emory, isn't it disingenuous to go around the world and not and fault Israel for all the problems in the Middle East, but not put any responsibility on the Arabs? And his smile went like this, and using the vernacular, he ripped me a new one in front of everybody. I don't know what he said, but it was not kind. The next day, those of you who know Ken Stein will imagine this. He called me up the next day in my office and said to me, John, he said, I taught you good. Now, he might not want to have, now he probably wouldn't mind admitting that, but I'll never forget that. It was one of those proud compliment moments. Relating to that, and I'm trying to frame where I'm coming from for all of this conversation. So that first job I mentioned, I was working at the Israeli consulate in Atlanta. I was the information officer, the only non-yet Israeli citizen working there, while we're talking, by the way, just 28 air raid sirens have been going off here. Really stop. Okay. I was working at the Israeli consulate.
Hamas just claimed that they set off 90.
Sorry?
Hamas just claimed that they set off 90 rockets towards Ashkelon and Ashdod.
Okay, thanks. I have no doubt. So I'm working at the Israeli consulate. It's if you remember the season, again, whether you were there or not, or conscious or not, it was during what was called the first Intifada, late 1980s. And the Israeli consulate in Atlanta at that time had the first Israeli Arab to head a diplomatic mission of any Israeli mission, consulate, or embassy anywhere in the world up until that point. And he was my boss. It was a fascinating time. I will tell you, with a degree in international studies, and it's annoying me, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm going to turn the noise off. I learned in a year and a half working with Mohammed Masarwa more than I learned in 4 years of having a major in international studies, focusing on Middle Eastern studies, and which included a semester here at Tel Aviv University. No question about it. I'm a Jewish kid from New Jersey, and when I would write his speeches, they were always peppered with Herzl and Moshe Dayan and Ben Gurion and Golda Meir and everything. And he said, sorry, Jonathan, that's not me. So I had to learn to be an Arab Israeli lawyer, more than 10, a generation my senior. It was a fascinating experience. And I also learned a tremendous amount about being an Arab Israeli, about Islam, about not the orientation, the worldview of Arab Israelis, which will come into our conversation in a little bit. An incredible experience to this date, now at 56 and a half years old, still one of the top 2 best jobs in my life. And then I want to rewind to a third experience and story that took place a year or 2 years before. It was this, all I know was my senior year. So the last half of 1986 or the first half of 1987. And I had a 400 level class with Ken Stein. Don't know the topic, but it was the Middle East. Very small group. I forget the academic term that they call that, but small group. And he had us go around the room at the beginning of that class and introduce ourselves. And we did. And coincidentally, going around what was effectively a long conference table, starting from his left, going around, I was sitting to the end on the right. Everyone introduced themselves. And when everyone finished, he looked at me, he said, Jonathan, you're the only one in the group who mentioned anything about being married and having a family. Which again, if you know Ken Stein, that would have resonated. It didn't faze me at the time because that was my orientation. And he asked us, because he asked the question, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I said, in 10 years, I'd like to be living in Israel, married and raising a family. I accomplished 2 of the 3. I was married and raising a family. We were not yet living in Israel 10 years later. Now, having sat in that class for as long as I did and all of this experience, I will also tell you that nothing that I studied at Emory really could have prepared me for where I am today here. A great foundation, don't get me wrong. I know so much more than even many of my neighbors who you would think that you live in Israel, you know the history. Nah, people don't know the history. People don't care about the history. People don't know nuance. I appreciate that. But what I've learned, I refer to myself as living in my own petri dish because I'm both the experiment and observing myself as the experiment, but I'm living the dream. And one thing that I've learned is that there are no, specifically relating to the Middle East, there are no isolated incidences. There are things that happen that are isolated that don't have a particular reason that we know of at that time. They may be completely coincidental, but everything has a cause and everything has an effect. And here, it's important to be aware of that and try and understand that whenever something happens, it's not in a vacuum. It's very, very complicated. There are lots of dots to connect. And so what I like to do now is begin to try and just give you a couple of minutes of how we got here, meaning to this week and the incessant rocket firing. If Andrea's correct, the Hamas is reporting 90 missiles now. It's bringing us awfully close to 2,000 rockets and missiles that have been fired from Gaza since Monday night. So we're talking about 3 days. It's quite outrageous. But I just want to, and as much as I said, everything is a matter of perspective, the perspective that I'm going to focus on is really the last month. And it's timely because today's the last day of Ramadan. And by the way, just parenthetically, living in Israel, you learn a whole lot more about Islam and frankly, I think develop a whole lot more respect for Islam than anything you could do in almost any academic setting, at least that I'm familiar with. Maybe schools are different now. Unfortunately here, my experience is almost 2 decades in Israel. Ramadan is a time that it's it's their holy month, but it's a time that's marked by a lot of violence. Not all month. I don't want to misrepresent that, but to, someone can research it and check. But typically, as Ramadan progresses toward the end of the month, there's more violence. It's just an uptick. It's like that. That was a catalyst this year for something completely new. I mentioned that I was working at the Israeli consulate during what was called the Intifada, like the original Intifada, the first one. Now, this year, our Palestinian Arab neighbors created, and it's spilled over to Israeli Arabs, something called the TikTok Intifada. What does that mean? They take their phones and they're running around Israel, Jerusalem, Jaffa, there were a couple of Haifa, I think, a couple of other mixed cities, and filming themselves assaulting Jewish people and putting it on TikTok. This triggered riots against Arabs, Arabs rioting against Jews. What we're seeing now, and I'll talk about it at more length, I don't really have my arms around it other than to tell you what's happening here. Forget what's happening in Gaza right now. What's happening domestically in Israel is horrible. There are riots. There have been lynchings. People are being stopped. Their cars are being smashed. They're being beaten silly. There's a soldier who's in the hospital in Tel Aviv. He happened to be in Jaffa, a mixed neighborhood, and he was set upon. And he's now in the hospital in Tel Aviv. It just happened tonight. There were riots and tear gas and stun grenades fired at Israeli Arabs. I'm not talking about in Ramallah. I'm not talking about in Gaza City. I'm talking about in Haifa, our third largest city. Today, these are things that are happening now. And it's silly at this point to say who started it, meaning who started the violence, the riots. It's just got this domino effect, and it's terribly serious. It's taking place in several mixed cities. To articulate that synagogues and Torah scrolls are being burned sounds like Nazi Germany. It sounds like a pogrom, but it's actually happening among our neighbors. And I'm not saying that it's only violence from Arabs to Jews. It's the other way around as well. And I don't know how we're going to get out of it. I don't know how we're going to unravel this mess. But that is one big mess that's taking place in parallel to what's going on our southern border that has the immediate threat to be tremendously life-threatening. There's been an increase in terrorism, stonings, shootings. Just before the recent stuff with Gaza began to evolve. There was a shooting in the Shomron in Samaria, 3 people injured, 1 died of his wounds a few days later. Right near where we live in Gush Etzion, there was a 60-year-old woman. Now, there are a lot of reasons why it's suggested why she may have done it. Who went to try and attack soldiers with a knife, and she was shot and died from her wounds. And I don't know I don't know a whole lot of details, but things are going crazy, and all of this is happening, and yet there's another really compelling piece, unfortunately, and I'm going to try to be as academic as Ken Stein would have me, because I so respect him, but I do have my biases, and it's very hard to not live and express them. I don't think it's difficult here to light a fire and see things get out of control. And we're seeing that. I think between Ramadan and between the fact that about 2 weeks ago now, the Palestinian Authority canceled their elections that were scheduled for next week. Remember, these would have been the first elections in the Palestinian Authority in 15 years. Now, ostensibly, they blamed Israel because 62 or 6,300 Palestinian Arabs in Jerusalem weren't going to be able to vote in Jerusalem. And so therefore, that was their excuse for canceling the elections. However, in all honesty and in all fairness, the reason why they canceled the elections, and it's known and it's transparent, and if you were in my house and had X-ray vision, you would see the Arab village, the Palestinian Arab village, whose residents work in my town and who've been in my building, who built the apartment that we're in, who I speak to reasonably openly, they know that the elections were canceled because Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, was reasonably sure that this time he was going to lose, and he didn't want to lose. So better to cancel, and always easy to use Israel as the punching bag. All of this is now taking place, and Friday, a week ago tomorrow, there were riots that began on the Temple Mount. It's hard to believe that these were spontaneous, because pictures that have been released show rocks and other weapons that were being stockpiled, not just on the side, but in their holiest site, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is part of the reason I believe that Israeli troops ultimately went into the mosque. And that's going to be a trigger for Muslims all around the world, as it was. And Jordan, if we remember, Jordan ostensibly has control over the Temple Mount. That was an agreement that was made after the Six-Day War. Control was reverted to the Jordanians. Then it was King Abdullah I. No, then it was King Hussein, not Abdullah. Now we have Abdullah II. And Jordan's role is being challenged by Hamas, which is trying to assert itself as the de facto caretaker of the Temple Mount, and specifically their holy site there, the dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome. And necessarily, the Arab and Muslim world blamed Israel, even the countries with which we established a peace agreement. It's almost like a chain reaction. Something happens on the Temple Mount and you blame Israel, regardless of the fact that they're using their holy site as a launching ground for violence against people. And it wasn't, by the way, the last thing to say about this, it wasn't violence simply on the Temple Mount. Violence throwing rocks down at the temple, at the Western Wall Plaza. Violence throwing rocks at the street with cars passing beneath the Temple Mount, risking injury. So there was an actual threat of people getting hurt, and it makes sense for security to go in and stop it. But it's to the extent that everything is a trigger point here, the Temple Mount is even more so. And also related to all of this, there's a neighborhood to the north, to the north of the Temple Mount, commonly referred to as Sheikh Jarrah. And I'm using the Arabic name because that's how you'll hear of it, if you're hearing of it at all. But it was an original neighborhood that was inhabited by Jews before 1948, before Israel declared independence, built near the kever, the grave of Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet, whose grave is there in the neighborhood. So that was a magnet for Jewish people to live there. Obviously, that neighborhood became part of Jordan in 1948. Jews were kicked out, Jewish properties were taken, and I'm not an expert on this. There are some basic facts that I know, and you have heard about or may hear about, specifically with members of Congress who have signed some kind of resolution that there should be no funding because Israel is threatening to evict, I think it's 4 Arab families who live in a particular building that is owned by Jewish people, that was owned by Jewish people before 1948, and the ownership was restored to the Jewish owners after 1967. And ironically, and I understand why that will be problematic on a whole lot of levels. Again, happy to discuss it with questions. But what's the irony? Apparently, there was an agreement between the owners and the residents that all they wanted was recognition that the Jewish owners own the place, and instead of living there as squatters for free, they should pay rent. Until the Palestinian Authority got involved, and they said, no way, we're not giving you authority on anything. It's Jerusalem, it's our building, you don't have it. You don't have any reason. And it's somewhat astounding to me, I have to say, and sadly reminds me of things that have been going on in America recently, that you have riots over things that are being adjudicated in courts, in legitimate courts, not in kangaroo courts, not courts that government bodies control. They're legitimate, independent judicial bodies here, as in America, and you have riots happening, but ironically, not because of something that has taken place, but something that might take place. And all of that is kind of rolling into the anniversary that I alluded to, that we celebrated this past Sunday night and Monday, Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim, the 54th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem. By the way, when you come over, come to visit, you have to come to see my new apartment. We're on the 8th floor of a tremendous building that overlooks Jerusalem. And with the binoculars that my son used, we can see the old city and the Temple Mount. And the Golden Dome lit, and you see all of Jerusalem before you, and you see the mountains of Jordan to the right. And when, on a clear day like tonight was, you even see the skyline of Amman. Okay, just to give you a sense, it's stunning. And I always say to people when I'm showing them from the view from my balcony, I wish I had this view during the 6-day war. It would have been fascinating to watch the troops moving in and around. A little too many troop movements for my liking this week, but anyway, tremendous celebration. There were cancellation of various elements of the celebration of the Jerusalem Day in Jerusalem this week, this week and this year, because of the threat, because of the concern. And Jews, which is normal on Jerusalem Day, Jews go up to visit the Temple Mount. This year that was banned. It overlapped with Ramadan. Things were already tense. I can make the case in both ways. Very, very difficult, but I will tell you also, just on a strictly personal perspective, my very curious son with the binoculars and cell phone camera told me on Sunday night, he says, Abba, I'm not going to school tomorrow. We're going to Jerusalem and things are dangerous there. I'm scared. What do you say to your son? Your Jewish son who you're raising in the land of Israel, and of course we believe that it's our land, but we also believe that it's not mutually exclusive to other people being here. What do you say to your son that no, Jerusalem's not safe, you shouldn't go to Jerusalem? It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. So that brings us to what I would say the big trigger, that experience at the wedding that took place on Monday evening. We were leaving for the wedding. The same 15-year-old son says, Hamas says at 6 o'clock, they're going to launch rockets. They launched rockets. They were threatening that if Israel didn't remove all forces from the Temple Mount, they were going to do that. And again, like a Swiss watch, that's exactly what happened. And now it's been escalating. We're in our 4th day of this. I don't know the count. You can investigate yourselves, but based on what it was before we began this webinar, and Andrea saying that there were another 90 plus the ones that took place before, we're well on the way to 2,000 rockets in 3 full 24-hour periods. It's outrageous. Oh, by the way, I did the math based on 1,500 rockets over 3 days. That's still 20 an hour, right? But they're not coming hourly scattered out like that, a couple every minute. They're coming in barrages. They're trying to overcome and test the iron and break through the Iron Dome system. If you're not familiar with that, I'll talk about that after. You can also ask questions. My problem with where we are, one of my problems, is that it's still simply outrageous that we're living here in Israel with the threat of rockets being fired at our civilian populations. And they don't even pretend. It's not like, oops, we missed. We're aiming for your military base, but we accidentally shot it toward Sderot, or tonight Beersheba. I think it's our 4th or 5th largest city, the capital of the Negev. Dozens of rockets went that direction today. They've also, by the way, shot enough rockets toward the center of Israel that for most purposes, flights in and out of the main Ben Gurion airport have been canceled. The airport is effectively closed, and flights coming in are going to the new Ramon airport to the north of Eilat in the southern Negev desert, and then people are being bused up to the center. But apparently Hamas knows that, and they're firing rockets toward the Ramon airport to see if they can close that one down too. At one point this week, there were 200 rockets fired in 1 hour. I think that was on, well, I don't know. It was one day this week. Schools have been hit. Private homes have been hit. There are several dead. Ironically, several dead include Israeli Arabs. A father and a daughter were killed in their house in Lod, I believe, which happens to be one of those cities that there's Arab Jewish rioting going on. So again, they're living amongst us, or I should say, we're living together and we're fighting one another, but we still have that common enemy shooting rockets, and those rockets don't test. It's not like you can smear some blood on the doorpost like in Egypt a few thousand years ago and be protected. When the rocket's coming, they're not looking to see if it's a Jewish or if it's an Arab home. Earlier in the day today, when the air raid sirens were going off, there were sirens in Rahat, which is the 50,000 person Bedouin city in the Negev and other Bedouin Arab areas. It's ironic. The number as of 2 days ago, when I prepared a similar, my first similar briefing, was that 1.5 million Israelis were living under the threat of rocket fire. Today, rocket sirens went as far as Nazareth in the north. Look at a map if you're not familiar with it. That's quite far. I would say that we're living with easily half of our population under the threat of rocket fire from Gaza. So about 4 million people. Per Google, thanks Moshe, Beersheba is the 7th biggest in population, but the 2nd biggest in terms of size. It's the size of 2.5 times the size of Tel Aviv, right? It's very spread out. Tel Aviv's a very small, dense city that goes up. Beersheba is not. But still, they're going for the big cities. They're going for the targets, and those are also mixed cities. I want to underscore something, and not getting really personal on this at least. In most of these places, they have about anywhere from 20 to maybe 45 seconds or a minute from the time they hear the air raid siren to be able to get cover in their safe room, if they have a safe room. I'd like you to think, when you taking a shower the next day or so, or using the bathroom, or anything else that puts you in some kind of compromising situation. My daughter said, "Oh, Abba, tell all the people on the webinar tonight on your conference to download the Red Alert app, so they hear it, so they understand." I said, "Oh, if they don't know Israel, they really won't, but it's annoying to them as much as it is." Now there are 45 red alerts since the last time I checked and turned off the phone. So if you want to download the Red Alert app and be annoyed and concerned and worried and pray for us, please do. But think about it more practically. Would you be afraid to take a shower, not knowing if rockets are going to come out, and you might slip and fall getting out, or the towel might not stay on as much as you want it to as you're trying to get out? There are a lot of uncomfortable situations. Life is very, very stressful here. I made some notes. A friend of mine, would actually, anyone wants to join next week, a briefing that I planned before all this started to go crazy. On the 19th, I'm using a friend who's a security and diplomacy expert. He sent for a similar briefing. I don't know what will be then. It'll be very interesting. He said that as of this evening, Israel has targeted 750 targets, Hamas targets that have been destroyed, including 33 terror tunnels and over 60 terrorist leaders. And the Iron Dome has had a 90% success rate. That was a much longer, and if it was dragging on, I apologize, overview than I intended to give you. But now I want to tell you what to look for. Okay, and what does it bring us to now? Monday, my son-in-law was one of the first 5,000 troops to be called up because of the sensitivity of what he does. My son went back down to his base. The base happens to be in the south. We don't know exactly, because they took his phone away, exactly where he is, but there are rumors that as early as tonight, Israeli ground forces may go into Gaza, and he'll be one of them. And that's the scariest thing in my life. I've done stupid things in my life. I was too young when I was a sophomore at Emory to realize that going to the Soviet Union by yourself to save Jews there and be at the threat of the KGB could have been really threatening. Now I realize retroactively, in hindsight, how dangerous that really could have been for me. But right now, this is the most scary point of my life. There's no question about that. As of this evening, the Minister of Defense authorized calling up of an additional 9,000 on top of 7,000. We're now at 23,000 reservists who are being called up. And I'm not a military expert, but I've spoken to some people. And in Israel, we're right on the border of the low end of what is already an indication that a ground advance is coming. Now, it's not happened yet. It may be words that this, like taking out Hamas terror leaders, all could be pushing Hamas to come to a situation where they would back down. There have been talks of a ceasefire, but clearly there hasn't been a ceasefire. Anything can happen in any direction in the next 24 hours or so. I mentioned the airport is closed. One of the ironies to that to me is that for the whole pandemic, United Airlines continued to fly, right? Daily flights, even more than El Al. United Airlines was making trips from the US on a daily basis. Now United, American that just started a new route, its first route, canceled. Delta is canceled. European airlines are canceling. It's not a good situation when your country has one major international airport and that's closed. We want to be looking, so we need to be looking and seeing what will come of that. We want to be looking to see domestically, will there be any kind of healing? Can we rewind and even if someone said to me today, oh, look how they're behaving, they should be kicked out. I'm like, no, it's just exposing what was already beneath, and we need to be doing things to heal the society. And who on earth knows what will come of it domestically, and that's a whole separate parallel issue. And I don't fully have my arms around that. We need to follow the rockets. When I first started doing this briefing on Tuesday, they had not yet fired rockets to Tel Aviv. By doing so, already we know that's an escalation. By going further and going into the Galilee, we know that that's an escalation. By deliberately going toward Beersheba today, we know that that's an escalation. The question is, how much do they want to escalate? What are their limits? We don't know. How many can they get off in a period of time? How many long-range ones do they have? Are they saving rockets for some kind of Hail Mary? And as someone asked in the call I did 2 days ago or yesterday, I don't even know, it's all a blur. What's the point at which Hamas will cry uncle? At which you push them to the wall so much that they say enough? And my response was, and I still believe, that unlike the example was used with the assassination of the Iranian general Soleimani, how Iran went very, very quiet after that. Hamas is not going quiet. Hamas is very different from Iran right now. We need to follow what's going to happen in the rest of the Arab world, among our allies, among those with whom we have warming relations, where something that's a calamity that will happen. I certainly don't pray for that, but unfortunately in a war, things like that do happen. And then the other big picture piece, and some of you may not be as tapped into our elections as your own elections in the States. I assume everyone here is from America, but I don't know. We've just now had our fourth election in 2 years, and it seemed until this week we were potentially on the verge of having an unusual coalition government with Prime Minister Netanyahu not included for the first time in over a decade, and a mix of parties going from the right to the far left, all becoming part of what's going to be the change coalition. As of this evening, the head, Naftali Bennett, who is the head of the right of center Yamina party, has announced that is no longer an option to pull together. There's so much that needs to be done to fight Hamas and defend ourselves that there's no substantial way to pull a government together, including right and left-wing parties. And he, who had been opposed to going into a fifth election, now seems to think that that's more favorable than putting a coalition together that includes left-wing parties and would also have included for the very first time support from an Arab Islamist party, an Israeli Arab Islamist party. That seems to have fallen apart. And that's, until this evening, I was asking and raising questions rhetorically. Now we're beyond rhetoric as far as the political impact, and that can go in any number of directions. This could be the life preserver that Prime Minister Netanyahu desperately needs because he's not been able to form a government for the last, well, he broke that agreement a year ago, but he's not been able to maintain a stable government for the last 2 years, and it's unclear what his political future will be. Two more observations and then just some summary, and again, happy for your questions. The first day that this all happened, 500,000 Israeli school kids stayed home. We wanted to keep kids in. Home. They closed the schools for fear that a rocket would strike and there would be a mass casualty. 500,000 is a lot of kids. So putting into perspective of a country of a little over 9 million people, we're talking about approximately 20% of all of the children in the schools in Israel. Now today, since Tel Aviv was hit, I don't know what the plan, tomorrow's Friday, so we don't have schools on Friday, but I don't know who stayed home today. It could be close to half of the school children. My son, my 15-year-old son, was of course disappointed that his school was still in session all week. But we're trying to protect our children from mass casualty. And of course, the irony, and it can't be unstated and it can't be stated enough, is that Hamas uses their women and children to hide behind as their defense. And I got into an argument. I'm typically right of center on certainly my Israeli politics and a lot of other things. I got into an argument today with an associate who's very left of center. And I said, for me, that's a war crime that Hamas, forget what they do to us, what they're doing to their own people on whose behalf they allegedly advocate. It's horrible. And I have tremendous empathy. I don't have any answers, but I feel for 2 million residents of Gaza, most of whom are probably not terrorists. They might support Hamas. They're not actively terrorists, but they're living under the heel of a horrible, horrible terrorist regime. And I can't not have empathy or feel for them. And how do I feel? I already said this. I'm I think more scared than I've ever been in my life. Having a son who, as of right now, for all I know, maybe suiting up to go into Gaza, I don't know. Having my son-in-law, thank God we live close to my daughter and our grandchildren because that they're here. We were all supposed to be together this weekend for Shabbat, for my wife's birthday. My son was going to get out of the army, so all of the other kids wanted to come home so we could all be together as a family. And we have Shavuot next week, so we were all looking forward to that. It's clear that that's not happening, and that's also stressful. And I even sense with my 2-year-old grandson tonight at bedtime, he's out of whack. He doesn't know what's going on. He knows that Abba is with chayalim, with soldiers. And when they did a video chat earlier, my grandson kept saying, Abba, I want to see the chayalim. I want to see the soldiers. I don't know what he understands. I don't know what he thinks about that. But he's out of sorts, and we're experiencing that. We're dealing with it. It's scary. I'm scared for ourselves. I'm scared for all of the soldiers. Now more than ever in my life, I'm actualizing what it means to be a soldier going into Gaza. We've been here before. We've been here during operations, but it's never been as real for me. I'm angry. I'm angry as hell. I'm angry at the terrorists that they exist this way, and that they threaten us the way they do. I've also become very dispassionate, and it wasn't on purpose. But even with the red alert, it's like I'm getting sick of it already. I feel like I have to know what's going on. I have to know at least academically. Oh, yeah, tonight they started firing at Beersheba. That's a an escalation. But if it's only at Sderot and only at Ashdod and only at Ashkelon, two of the cities along the coast that are in very close range, and they only have those cities, just the three of those happen to have 300 or 400,000 people just in those three cities. I feel like, oh, well, it's only there. Oh my God, no. That's 400,000, 300,000 people who are sleeping in a single room that's a bomb shelter because they're afraid and the kids are afraid and all of the circumstances. And I'm angry about being dispassionate. I'm angry that I shouldn't pay attention to every single red alert. And even if I don't know where it is, just have a presence to pray for them, and that there aren't going to be more casualties, and that the kids who are afraid will be resilient and be okay. Today, one of my favorite things to do is listen. We don't have great radio here. I miss classic rock. I put on one of my mixes on Spotify, and I was really happy, and I was enjoying the music, and then I caught myself being happy, and I'm like, that's not okay. People are suffering. We're about to potentially go to war, and I'm listening to classic rock and roll. That annoyed me, and the fact that we made a wedding we celebrated a wedding the other day. The fact that tomorrow we're having all the families here for Sheva Brachot, the traditional after wedding parties, and we went out to dinner in Jerusalem last night and got to go into the Machane Yehuda market and buy stuff and chat, which was such a reprieve after a year of not really even being out. I'm really very, very, yeah. It's except for when my parents died, there's nothing like this, and yeah, that's probably a good point to take a pause and ask you if you have any thoughts or questions. I'm really happy to do that. And we're not a lot of, actually, maybe what I'm going to do is change the view so we all see each other. And I'm happy for anyone, if you want to text me something. Lexi, thank you just for the prayers. Rabbi Fleschel, thank you. Students are planning to come to Israel starting in 2 weeks. What are the best ways to address their concerns? Faith. You can't be here without it, I think, or it's certainly easier to have it. What Noah Miller just wrote, by coming to Israel, especially now when regular tourism has not yet opened up, it's an affirmative action. Don't just come here. And I know what your students are planning to do, Rabbi Fleschel, and that's important. But they should be sure that this is an affirmation of their faith, of what they believe, of their solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people. And I don't want anyone else to have to experience what we're experiencing, but by the same token, to experience it will make us as a people that much more connected, because we don't understand each other. Most Israelis don't understand American Jews, and I would say vice versa. And I think, and we're all Jews. I mean, we're not, I don't know, I'm assuming everyone here is Jewish. I don't know, and I'm not doing a check, and I don't care. And not all Israelis are Jewish, but as Jews, whether you're citizens and residents of the state or not, we have a common history and we have a common destiny. And that's what I would impart them. And they can bring phone numbers of people like myself, and I'm sure you have staff who will help them along the way. Any other questions? Toda Rabba. Yeah, who I see the comment, but I don't see who wrote it. Lori, thanks. Nice to see so many people I haven't seen since college. Sort of like a reunion, inspired by terror instead of Dooley's Week. Um, any other questions, folks, on any of this or anything that I haven't addressed? When we've exhausted this, I'll just give you some summary comments. Yeah, Noah, thank you. The prayers are really appreciated. Claims of Israel being an apartheid state, Morgan, okay. I think I just wrote an article about that. I do a lot of writing because I work among Christians. I write a lot for Christian and conservative websites. And I think I just wrote an article about, oh yeah, I did, actually. I said, for a state that's supposedly an apartheid state, we're really bad at it. There is no apartheid in Israel. First of all, there's a distinction, okay? I'm gonna assume that we're all at a similar academic level. Let's just be honest. First of all, those who make the claim that we're apartheid are referring typically to the Palestinian Arabs who are not Israeli citizens. Those in Gaza and those in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, where I live, are the ones who are, oh good, Dr. Blumenthal's coming in now, so he won't have the ability to grade me. No, Palestinian Arabs are not equal citizens, but they're not citizens and they don't want to be citizens. So there are issues, and do they live in a situation that is less than full independence that they want? Do they love us? Do they want us gone? Yes, some, not all. It's a complicated situation. But you know, I kind of get my back up when people blame everything on the quote unquote occupation, because I mean, yes, we have a right to be here. It's the land of Israel, but we're not here to displace anybody. And the Palestinians in various forms, going back to 1947, and when, of course, there was no Palestinian Arab identity then. And by the way, my father was a Palestinian. He was born in Haifa in 1937, and he was a Palestinian. So that's why I refer to them as Palestinian Arabs, because I'm the descendant of a Palestinian Jew. And there needs to be a resolution of it. But there have been multiple opportunities. And I do believe this. I believe this still, despite what's going on our southern border now. Oh, and I neglected to mention, by the way, as I was logging in, I don't know if any of you fellow Israelis who are here heard the news, but apparently 3 rockets were launched from Lebanon and hit northern Israel tonight. So things may escalate on that front. I wouldn't be surprised as well. We need a resolution of the situation with the Palestinian Arabs who do not want to be Israeli citizens. Frankly, most Israelis don't want them to be Israelis either. But by the same token, when people throw out the word apartheid referring to Israel, that's nonsense. 20% of our country are Arab citizens. My boss at the consulate in Atlanta is an Israeli Arab. He's been a judge in the kind of mid-level of our courts. He was a mayor. He's highly respected. He's highly educated. Arabs are integrated in so many ways. I don't want to say every way, because most of them don't serve in the army, and that's limiting. It's not discriminatory, but if you're not in the army in the state of Israel, it's limiting. I've had job interviews, and it's limiting for me, because I made Aliyah. I moved to Israel at the age of 40, and try as I did, I wasn't able to serve in the army, and being able to fill that out on an application makes a difference, and all the more so if you're an Israeli Arab. Israeli Arabs have the right to vote. Until 1 or 2 elections ago, they were the third the Arab parties represented the third largest political entity in our Knesset. You now have a leader of one Arab party, ironically an Islamist, who is saying enough of the blaming Israel. We want to be equal. We want to be we want to be part of the society and the system, and we're not going to fight against it. But these are the basic things that we need. And honestly, most of those things that this man, his name is Mansour Abbas, wants are things that most Israelis would be okay with, would be perfectly comfortable with. And from my perspective, should be. So, I mean, we can go into a much longer conversation about why Israel is not an apartheid state. There's no legislative anything like in South Africa when blacks in South Africa were not equal citizens. Period. There's nothing like that. Nothing like that at all. I hope I answered that. It's a much longer conversation. I find it offensive. Going back to our good friend Jimmy Carter, who wrote a whole book about this. Israel, Peace Not Apartheid, was one of the early propagators of this. And from my perspective, it's disgusting, and even above disgusting, it's dishonest. And I know it's been a number of years since I happened to sit in the class with David Blumenthal as my professor or Ken Stein as my professor. I still have a level of integrity that things need to be honest. We can disagree, but things need to be honest. More questions? Shane?
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Jonathan, it's good to see you. Been a long time. So I get frustrated because I actually know the history, and I know the history of the going back a pretty long time. And I too sat in Ken Stein's class, and I readily acknowledge my bias, which is also pro-Israel. And I've been actually recently reading up on Egypt's history, and I'm a little astounded at the similarities and the parallels, which I had not previously picked up on, between Egyptian history and Israeli history. And people fail to recognize that the entire area has very similar history. It was all Roman at one point. It was all Ottoman at one point. It was all it was all conquered and ruled by similar parties, and all goes back a very long time, with very similar history. And I don't like double standards, and I don't like the fact that it in fact drives me completely bonkers that Israel does a really poor job of getting its own history out into the universe. And there's a double standard out there. There isn't anywhere else in the world where our country defends itself in a war and gains territory and people expect it to give it back, or where it's got a history that mimics the same history of people around it, and people have expectations, like say Pakistan. Pakistan's history and Israel's history are very similar. They are formed the same way following the world wars, and nobody says anything about Pakistan. Nobody says anything about China and Tibet. And the double standards are astounding, but Israel doesn't get its message out regarding its foundation. The Palestinian people are pawns, and the terrorists allow the people to be used as pawns, and the Palestinian countries allow the Palestinians to be used as pawns. The neighbors, this is my spin on it. And the world just kind of lets them get away with it, because I think partially Israel doesn't do a good enough job of getting its message out, that it's been around since, BC 1000. And to the extent it wasn't the power broker when it was being occupied by Rome and occupied by the Ottomans, it wasn't its fault. It was the fault of the occupier. And I wish there was something people could do to get the country to get that message out a little bit better about the history.
This has been, Jana, it's a correct statement. It's been a legitimate criticism of Israel since I worked at the consulate in Atlanta, however many years ago that was, and I would argue before. And I don't say this in a flippant way, but what we need is a really good 6-day war where we just look like the heroes. And we haven't had that 6-day war thing going on in a while. And we don't always look like heroes. I will remind you, it has nothing to do with the quote unquote conflict per se, but we have a tremendous anniversary to celebrate next week in the history of Israel and the Jewish people, the 30th anniversary of Operation Solomon, where we showed our brotherhood with Black Jews in Ethiopia, the first time ever Jews were airlifted from Black Africa to the West, not going out of Africa into slavery, but leaving oppression, coming to freedom. And it's tremendous and it's historic. but that doesn't mitigate the fact that you said the message doesn't get out. We know the truth. We know, although honestly, and I say this, I think with full integrity, not everybody here who's in this conversation had a class with Ken Stein, and doesn't really know all of the history and can't defend it, and not being able to defend it, and therefore being bombarded with lies, and multiply that times many zillions of other universities where you don't even have people of the quality or integrity of a Ken Stein. It's an uphill battle so you're one of the reasons I thought that this was an important conversation to have tonight. I told you at the outset, I thought it was weird. Okay, we're a bunch of Emory alumni. That's very nice. Is that this is my personal shot at public diplomacy. And I didn't know if the crowd would be mostly pro-Israel, mostly hostile to Israel, a mix. And I wasn't limiting. I'm happy to have even the most uncomfortable conversations as conversations, but I hope so. I hope that something that comes out of this conversation now is that everyone's able to take away one thing, two things, three things to reinforce the support. I know that there have been rallies around the world. I stand with Israel, and that's great. It feels good.
Even so basic as going back to, 1914, the resolution that gave Israel Jordan, and Jordan essentially being that Palestinian state, that's been lost.
Jordan being the Palestinian state, and that Jordan occupied and annexed Judea and Samaria and half of Jerusalem and all of the Arabs in those areas, and never gave them citizenship. You'll hear me say frequently, I refer to the Palestinian Arabs because there are Palestinian Jews that my father was, and they're Palestinian Arabs. But until 1948, when Israel declared independence, the only people referred to as Palestinians were the Jews. And it was only, and I don't believe it was in the 1950s, but certainly only in the 1960s, that the notion of Palestinian as an ethnic national identity even came about. So a lot of people say, oh, well, they're fake, it's not real. And I can make that argument. That's not my point. My point is they're here. Whatever they want to call themselves, they're here. We need to coexist somehow. But to the earlier question, as far as apartheid, to our legitimacy to be here, for anyone to tell me, Jonathan, you as a Jewish man raising a family can't live anywhere in the land of Israel alongside Arabs, Jewish ones, Christian ones, Circassians, I don't care, but don't tell me I can't be here. Don't make part of the land of Israel Yud and Ryan. That's not acceptable. And I'll defend that till I'm blue in the face, not to be mutually exclusive. And yet, what was the catalyst for this conversation is we have a group of people in Gaza backed by an ideology and funding from Iran and other places who think, no, not it's mutually exclusive. There was never a Jewish presence. There was not a Jewish temple. Come on. It's just lies. It's just stupid. And I can agree to have a disagreement. I can agree for a lot of things that are needed for coexisting, but I'll coexist based on reality, not based on nonsensical myth. And as I say that, I know the nonsensical myth is their reality. And I don't know how to unwind from that. And I know that my son may be sending love notes in the form of bullets from his M16 at some of those people to make that point within the next any number of hours. I don't know, Moshe's still here. Moshe, Andrea, two other alumni who are living here. I know you didn't have any particular interest for making any comments, but if there's anything that you do want to add, I welcome that. Any other questions? We can go on in this conversation all night, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. to be here. Yeah, whoever this was just said coming late. We will post the whole thing on YouTube. A couple of people arrived late, so you'll be able to see the whole conversation and share it. I'm happy to be interrupted, but I do want to begin to wrap up. At least for me, it's late, and I'll tell you, Professor Blumenthal, you're going to laugh, but now being a man over 50, I have a prostate who's also, I'm trying to get a fake ID. In college, I had a different kind of fake ID. Now I want to get a fake ID and tell my prostate that he's only 21 years old. Between my prostate and my son and son-in-law in the Army, this has not been a good week of sleep. So I'm looking forward to a bourbon or a scotch, whatever is closest on the shelf tonight to begin to unwind. But I do want to begin to wrap up. Did you have a comment? Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say, good luck for your sons.
Thank you.
And for all of
us.
For all of
need that.
Israel, for the soldiers, for the families, for everybody,
All of us.
all
All
of
of
you.
us, Arabs and Jews. Yeah, we need
The only
it.
thing we can
So-
do is every few hours pray for the state of Israel and all its occupants.
Yeah,
Those
I'll
that
do that. That leads.
Oh,
I did have one question. I
Yeah,
was
sure.
a few minutes late getting to the machine, so I wound up going to YouTube. It doesn't sound like what's happening here and what's happening on YouTube are happening at the same time. Are you doing two separate broadcasts?
No, for some reason, the YouTube and Facebook Live, which I publicized, didn't connect. So when I tried to live stream it this evening, it didn't happen. So I will retroactively go back and post those. Yes, and I will share the YouTube. I will share you all get an email from me,
Right.
the YouTube link, but if you don't get it quickly, because I'm tired.
YouTube is still running. Went back to check it just to be sure. It was running a minute ago.
Yeah, I'll get it up to, if you look at for the Genesis 123 Foundation,
Yeah,
you'll see a lot of snapshots of me hosting other webinars like this that I do. That's where this will be posted, but I will definitely send a link to all of you who have registered. 3.5 things that I want to speak practically about. It's very nice to have an academic conversation. I was never known simply for my academics at Emory. I was also a bit of an activist, and so I'm always looking for something to do. We just talked about prayer. I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone else's theology, but if you pray, we need your prayers.
and our tears.
Well, yeah. For my son and my son-in-law, yeah, they're two people, but we know that if the Army's calling up 23,000 reservists now, I don't know how many are in our standing Army. There are a lot of people who are waiting to go into Gaza, and who similarly are going to be on the northern border now, especially that rockets have been fired from Lebanon. So we want prayer for everybody, the families, people like me whose kids are waiting, who haven't spoken to their kids in 2 days, and don't know what's up, and that's terrifying.
Jonathan, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
The kids who have graduated from the Army and who have come back to America, can they be called up for those who've, done the Army, done everything, come back to America? Are they still counted as reservists?
They are counted as reservists. The Army, unless we're in a 6-day war, Yom Kippur war type situation where there's some sort of existential threat, I can't imagine the Army doing that. But what you'll see is young men and women coming back on their own, coming back. I believe that was a story of Michael Levin, one of the, if you will, famous lone soldiers,
Right.
who was killed in 2006. The years blur. The years and battles blur, to be honest. I don't know which war or battle that was, but you see that, that happens. So yes, they can be called up, but right now it's just people who are local.
You see, you started a Safta Brigade. for the octogenarians, we would be there to help too.
When I'm elected to Knesset, we'll have that conversation. But since that's not on my agenda, I make no promises. But we do covet the prayers for the families who, like myself, were waiting and with tremendous anxiety, for those who are injured. And this, I don't know, honestly, and it's embarrassing. I don't know if we're 7 people who have died, 8 people who have died, they're injured. But their families who are grieving. There's a soldier who was just hit by an his Jeep was hit by an anti-tank missile, and he was buried today. We need to pray for them. As my daughter said, if you don't have it, download the Red Alert app if you want to be annoyed. Thanks, Lori. I advocate, stand up. I assume in Atlanta, I saw friends all over the place downloading I Stand With Israel, putting on their social media. I'm not sure if I have any answers how to advocate for Israel. In addition to the prostate, the eyes aren't so great, but
I stand with Israel.
I stand with Israel. So
I
please
handed that out. I handed that out. So my Hebrew teacher brought it to me today. That's what it is. I stand with Israel. Up on my heart.
Look, there are a lot of ways to engage people, and this is great. When you go to Kroger and you check out and say, and how are you today? Because in America, people are polite some places still. And they say, how are you? You say, not so great. I'm really concerned about what's going on in Israel and the threat that the terrorists. You can engage conversations. That's
I did. I just checked out of Kroger's a few hours ago and said exactly. Is everything okay?
There you go.
So you have to. You can't just ignore it's, you just can't. It's not normal.
I happen to learn from a good guy who you live with for a few years. So of course,
we're 54 years in June. 54 years. Before the 6-Day War, after the 6-Day War, June 18, 67.
Should have another 54 together with lots of health.
Oy vavoy.
Oy vavoy. All right, as many as you want then. You survived Corona.
You've gotten a little bit older since you were in class with David. Not much.
Yes.
We wish we thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you. But everyone can advocate in their own way. You have Congress people, they listen. I of course I follow and participate in US elections. I'm very proud of my being an American citizen, though I'm not as attached as I have been. I know that there's some anti-Israel resolutions. Call up your congressman today or tomorrow and send emails and tell 10 other people to do that and say, no, Israel's our ally. They're not apartheid. And the lies that come out, if you want, I wrote an article about one of the things that Ilhan Omar wrote this week that just came out in Town Hall today. You can Google Jonathan Feldstein Town Hall, and I don't even remember what the subject is. It was too many hours ago. But advocate.
I advocate also supporting the IDF.
Support everything. So we need to support it. We can't let the
everything.
lies pass. And I know that's very difficult nowadays because there's so much bullying in the world and in social media, but do something. And the third thing I would say, and this is again not a pitch for me and for the Genesis 123 Foundation, but in the context of building bridges between Jews and Christians, we fund various projects. I don't want to run any projects. I'm not looking to do that. But we fund a basket of projects. Again, you can look at it at genesis123.co. This week, any money we raise is going to social welfare for soldiers, emergency medical, trauma and terror victims, and civilian security. And in full disclosure, I don't know how we're going to allocate that all out yet. For my first briefing that I did the other day, there were a few $1,000s that came in. If I have the opportunity and the privilege to load up my car with cold drinks and drive down to the Gaza border at some point when that's possible, and bring soldiers love and notes from people overseas, I'll do that. If there are other tangible needs, we'll do that. So whether yourselves, we're a small group here, but if people ask or if you want to advocate, we're doing something with integrity. The money is going to actual needs that I'm vetting out to make sure. And I may be in the process of delivering myself, or we'll just wire money to the
If we're
organization.
in Israel, we'll go with you in the car and deliver.
Oh, I look forward to that. That'll be a pleasure. I could go on for hours. I don't have anything more particular to say. I welcome if there are any other questions or thoughts. Again, and I want to thank you again, as I said at the outset. For me, this has been somewhat therapeutic. I go back into reality shortly and have to try and sleep, not knowing what's up with my son. And that's unnerving. But thank you for this opportunity. And I hope you got something out of it. I hope it was
What
helpful.
is your son's name?
My son is Natan.
Natan, and your
Son-in-law
Your
is
son-in-
Yechiel.
Yechiel.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we need prayers for all of the soldiers. They can be your
All.
poster children with their names, but all of the soldiers.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Moshe, you have something?
Nope, thank you very much. Enjoyed.
Thank you for participating, everybody. Stay tuned for Jackie. You unmuted. Do you have something before I say goodbye?
First I wanted just to say Laila Tov, but I think it was Mrs. Blumenthal, you said something about the reserve soldiers. So I recall many years ago, I think it was when we went, I'm here 30 years, when we went into Jenin, if I recall, and they called up the Miluim,
Yeah.
they called up for the reserves, and they said that they had 113% that
Wow.
arrived. So what the army does is, because they expect people not to show up, they invite 120% of their needs, and their 113% showed up. That means including people came in from abroad when they had to. So it's very
Thank you for sharing that, Jackie. Wow.
And Jackie, I don't know if you or anyone else who's here have the same sense of it, but to me, there's a tremendous, minus the riots that are going on that are tearing apart our cities, there's a tremendous sense of unity here now, that this has to end, that we've reached, in Hebrew, ad kan, that we've reached this point, and the terrorism that we've been suffering from Gaza really needs to stop. Will it stop? I don't know, but I feel that. I don't know about the rest of you.
it's very I mean, I could also very tired and very late, but also there was this excitement with the Abraham Accords, and this feeling like, oh, this is over, and like that there's going to be peace here. There was this excitement and people running to Dubai, and it's like it's a slap in the face. Oh, we have to get back to reality. And another thing is, I think that it's really important to advocate for Israel. And also, I think that we don't have to explain ourselves. This is one of the psychological things that I've learned over the last few years, is that we just have to be the good people that we are. And we are all really for diversity and for coexistence, and just being who you are, and showing people what it means to be a Jew. And these are things that are really important, like being a representative of the Jewish nation, and people learning by watching. I've been doing yoga with a group of Middle Eastern women for the last 4 months, and everybody's been very caring about what's going on everywhere. And when I mentioned what was going on now, the TV that these women hear, they have no idea. And I just decided, she said, I don't know what Israel's doing, the poor Muslims. I mean, she's Muslim, but she said, oh, the poor Muslims, why are they trying to kill the poor Muslims? And And I decided that I don't have to explain myself. All I have to be is in my being the person who I am for coexistence. And I don't have to talk so much.
Good
That's
message.
all.
Yes.
Isn't this all related to the Abraham Accords and then the shift in the parties in the US? I mean, there's a direct threat to the whole Hamas in Iran, that was a threat to the whole issue there, because all of a sudden that there's a direct correlation.
I don't know. Certainly in a Middle Eastern geopolitical, there are very clear camps among the Arab and Islamic segments. The Iranians and the people oriented with Iran and the mostly Sunni Arab states. I don't want to begin a second class on all of that right now. However, I will. So I don't know if this right now this week is related to that, to the Abraham Accords. I just believe the terrorists behave like terrorists, and this was going to happen eventually. Hamas, between advocacy we talked about earlier for keeping Jews off the Temple Mount, and the Hamas is trying to assert itself domestically within the Palestinian Arabs themselves, because now they can't even have an election in which they can be elected into power. So this is how they assert themselves. That's normal. How much more funding, and I don't mean to get political, but it's clear that when you fund terrorists, you're more likely to enable terrorists. And with the release of, what was it, $230 million going from the US to the Palestinian Authority recently, it's emboldening. It's not sending a statement that we want to support you, we want to have you to have a two-state solution, but until you completely cease all of the terror activities and the incitement and everything else that has been on the table until then, no, we're going to keep the money. We're not going to invest. So I said everything's related. I don't know if I would necessarily draw a straight line between the dots of Abraham Accords several months ago and Hamas today. Hamas today is behaving the way Hamas behaves because they're Hamas. It happens to be today, and we had some Abraham Accords and 4 states make nice with Israel. And by the way, another piece that I should have mentioned before, and as something to look for, depending on what happens in the coming days and weeks. We got 4 countries that have recently established peace or normal relations with Israel that could withdraw on that. That's not impossible. The Jordanians might take home their ambassador. The Egyptians might take home the ambassador. It certainly doesn't mean that there's no coordination between Israel and the Saudis. Of course it is, because the Saudis need Israel and Israel needs the Saudis. But there won't be any public conversations about that. I don't know. This could go on forever.
Thank you very much.
It's late here.
Thank you,
all
Jonathan.
Thank you. Get a good night's
Thank you for
sleep.
joining.
You know what?
hope it
You're
was helpful.
wonderful. You're
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
Good
I didn't
night.
do this as a self-inflation, but it's nice to hear. Have a great night. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom and Chag Sameach.
Shalom.